Picture this. You're celebrating the biggest deal of your career at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, feeling on top of the world, when suddenly you spot your ex-wife across the room. The woman you divorced because she was holding you back. The woman you convinced yourself you'd upgraded from. But she's not alone. Sitting across from her is James Sterling, tech billionaire, Forbes cover star, a man whose net worth makes your achievements look like pocket change. And he's getting down on one knee, right there in front of everyone. Your ex-wife, the one you thought would never amount to anything without you, is about to become engaged to one of the most powerful men in the world. Derek Walsh thought he had it all figured out. Penthouse apartment, successful business, Instagram model girlfriend, the perfect life carefully curated for social media. But watching Sarah say yes to that billionaire's proposal shattered everything Derek believed about winning and losing in life. What happened next? Well, let's just say that when a narcissistic ex-husband decides he can't accept his ex-wife's happiness, things get dark, really dark. This is the story of a man who had everything, lost it all, and discovered that sometimes the biggest defeat can become your greatest victory if you're brave enough to face the truth about who you really are. Stay with me because this twisted tale of obsession, revenge, and ultimately redemption will keep you glued to your screen until the very last word. Derek Walsh adjusted his Hermes tie for the third time as he surveyed the glittering Manhattan skyline from the rooftop terrace of Le Bernardin's private dining room. At 35, he had constructed what he believed was the perfect life. A penthouse overlooking Central Park worth $8 million, a real estate empire that generated seven figures annually, and Amanda Cross draped on his arm like the latest luxury accessory. Amanda, at 24, was everything Derek's social circle expected from a successful man's girlfriend. Her Instagram account boasted 2 million followers who hung on her every carefully curated post. Her enhanced lips, surgically perfected figure, and platinum blonde hair made her photographically perfect for the lifestyle Derek wanted to project to the world. "Baby, you're being so weird tonight," Amanda pouted, her voice carrying the slight whine that Derek had initially found charming, but was beginning to grate on his nerves. She held up her phone, adjusting the angle to capture both her face and the spectacular city view behind her. "My followers are going to think you don't want to be here with me. This lighting is literally perfect for content." Derek forced his practiced smile, the same expression that had closed multi-million-dollar deals and charmed investors into backing his increasingly ambitious projects. "Just thinking about the Riverside development deal, sweetheart. It's going to be the biggest project of my career. 50-story luxury tower in the heart of Soho. We're talking about a $200 million development." The restaurant buzzed with the low murmur of Manhattan's elite conducting business over champagne and caviar. Derek had chosen this venue deliberately, not just for its Michelin stars, but for its clientele. He thrived on being seen, on the subtle nods of recognition as he passed tables filled with celebrities, politicians, and business titans. Every public appearance was a calculated move in the chess game of social climbing that had consumed his adult life. "You know what we should do?" Derek raised his crystal champagne flute, the Dom Perignon catching the ambient lighting from the restaurant's carefully designed atmosphere. "Let's toast to us, to winning, to having everything we ever wanted." Amanda giggled, a sound that once made Derek's heart race, but now felt as artificial as her eyelashes. She clinked her glass against his, already planning how to edit the moment for her Instagram story. "To being the hottest power couple in New York." Derek should have felt triumphant. The Riverside deal was practically guaranteed to close next week, cementing his reputation as one of the youngest and most successful real estate developers in the city. His social media presence was growing exponentially, with business magazines featuring him as a young mogul to watch. His bank account had more zeros than he had dreamed of as a struggling college graduate 10 years ago. So why did everything feel so fundamentally hollow? Maybe it was the way Amanda's eyes glazed over whenever he tried to have a conversation deeper than weekend plans or restaurant reservations. Maybe it was the realization that most of his friends were really business contacts who would disappear the moment his net worth declined. Maybe it was the growing suspicion that he had built his entire life around impressing people he didn't actually like or respect. Oh my God, Derek, look! Amanda's manicured nails, painted in this season's trending coral shade, dug into his forearm through his custom-tailored Tom Ford jacket. Isn't that the tech guy from that article in Vanity Fair? The one with the private island and the art collection? Derek followed her gaze across the restaurant's elegant dining room and felt his carefully constructed world tilt off its axis. There, at a corner table bathed in the warm glow of candlelight, sat Sarah Mitchell, his ex-wife. The woman he had divorced 18 months ago because she was supposedly holding him back from achieving his true potential. The woman he had convinced himself was a necessary sacrifice on his path to success. But Sarah wasn't alone. Sitting across from her, leaning forward with obvious fascination as she spoke, was a man Derek recognized immediately from countless magazine covers and business profiles. James Sterling, the tech billionaire whose net worth made Derek's achievements look like pocket change. Sarah looked radiant in a way that made Derek's breath catch in his throat. She wore a simple black dress that somehow made every other woman in the restaurant look overdressed and trying too hard. Her dark hair was swept back in an elegant chignon that revealed the graceful curve of her neck. The same neck Derek used to kiss during the early days of their marriage when he still believed love was more important than status. She was laughing at something James had said, and Derek remembered that laugh. It was pure and genuine, nothing like Amanda's practiced giggles or the calculated responses of the social climbers who populated Derek's current world. Sarah had always laughed with her whole body, throwing her head back slightly, her eyes sparkling with genuine mirth. "Derek? Hello? Earth to Derek?" Amanda waved her phone in front of his face, the screen displaying her half-finished Instagram story. "You're totally spacing out. Are you even listening to me?" But Derek couldn't tear his eyes away from the unfolding scene across the restaurant. As he watched, transfixed, James Sterling reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. The entire restaurant seemed to quiet around Derek, though he realized dimly that it was probably just the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. James Sterling, one of the most powerful and influential men in the world, stood up from his chair and moved to kneel beside Sarah's seat. The reaction was immediate and electric. Other diners began to notice, conversations stuttering to a halt as heads turned toward the unfolding proposal. Phones appeared like magic throughout the restaurant as guests recognized the magnitude of the moment they were witnessing. Derek felt Amanda tugging insistently on his sleeve, heard her excited squealing about getting video content of a real billionaire proposal, but it all sounded distant and muffled, like voices heard underwater. Sarah's hands flew to cover her mouth, tears streaming down her face in the candlelight as James spoke words Derek couldn't hear but could imagine. Words of love, of commitment, of building a future together based on mutual respect and shared dreams. Words Derek had never really meant when he had spoken similar phrases to Sarah 5 years ago, during their own engagement that had been more about social expectations than genuine emotional connection. The diamond ring James slipped onto Sarah's finger caught the restaurant's ambient lighting like a small star. Even from across the room, Derek could see that it was spectacular, not just in size but in its obvious thoughtfulness. This wasn't a ring chosen to impress others or make a statement about wealth. This was a ring chosen specifically for Sarah, reflecting her taste and personality in a way Derek's original engagement ring never had. The restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause. Champagne appeared at Sarah and James's table as if materialized by magic. Other diners approached to offer congratulations, and Derek watched his ex-wife graciously accept the well wishes of strangers who were moved by witnessing such an obviously genuine moment of love and commitment. Derek's ex-wife, the woman he had dismissed as insufficiently ambitious, had just gotten engaged to one of the most successful and respected men in the world. And Derek was watching it happen while sitting across from an Instagram influencer whose primary concern was whether the lighting was good enough for her social media content. For the first time in 18 months, Derek Walsh wondered if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. More than that, he wondered if the life he had built in Sarah's absence was actually worth having at all. The champagne in his glass suddenly tasted bitter, and the city lights that usually made him feel powerful and important now just looked cold and distant. Derek's penthouse felt different when they returned that night, though nothing had physically changed. The same minimalist furniture imported from Italy, the same floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Central Park, the same collection of awards and achievements displayed like trophies along his custom-built shelving. But somehow everything looked smaller now, less significant, as if the evening's revelation had shifted the entire scale of what mattered. Amanda sprawled across his white leather sectional sofa, still energized from the evening's excitement, her phone glowing blue against her face as she uploaded and edited the proposal videos she had captured. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the screen, adding filters and hashtags with the expertise of someone who had turned their entire life into content. "Can you literally believe that rock?" she gushed without looking up from her phone, her voice carrying the breathless enthusiasm she usually reserved for unboxing luxury products. I mean, it was seriously blinding. Like I couldn't even look directly at it. My engagement ring is going to have to be even bigger, obviously. I'm thinking maybe 15 carats, 20? I want something that makes a statement. Derek poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan 25-year-old scotch, the amber liquid burning his throat as he tried to process the evening's events. The whiskey had cost him $800 a bottle, but tonight it might as well have been rot-gut bourbon for all the satisfaction it provided. "Obviously," Derek repeated mechanically, his mind still replaying the moment he had watched James Sterling kneel beside Sarah's chair. "I already DM'd my friend Jessica. She's like totally connected in the jewelry world, works at Cartier, and has the inside scoop on all the celebrity engagement rings." Amanda continued, her thumbs never pausing in their social media choreography. "She thinks it was at least 8 carats, maybe 10. And you know what? The cut looked like a classic round brilliant, which is so timeless and elegant. Although personally, I think I'd want something more unique. Maybe a pink diamond? Or that new champagne color that's trending on TikTok?" Derek moved to his wall of windows, looking out at the city that had always made him feel powerful and important. Tonight, the lights just looked scattered and random, lacking any coherent pattern or meaning. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and tried to understand what had happened to him in that restaurant. "Did you know her?" Amanda asked suddenly, and Derek felt his entire body tense. He turned slowly to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "No, who?" "The girl who got engaged tonight. You were staring at her table pretty intensely during the whole proposal." Amanda's tone carried an edge Derek had never heard before, a hint of genuine curiosity mixed with something that might have been suspicion. "I mean, I get that it was exciting to witness, but you look like you'd seen a ghost or something." Derek's grip tightened on his scotch glass as he weighed his response. Amanda might be young and self-absorbed, but she wasn't stupid. She had noticed his reaction, and lying outright would only make her more suspicious. "I might have seen her around," Derek said carefully, falling back on the vague deflection that had served him well in business negotiations. "The real estate world is smaller than you think, especially in Manhattan. Everyone ends up knowing everyone eventually." But even as he spoke the words, Derek knew they were inadequate. Sarah wasn't in real estate anymore. After their divorce, she had returned to her first love, art restoration and curation. During their marriage, Derek had systematically discouraged her academic and artistic pursuits, calling them expensive hobbies and suggesting she focus her considerable intelligence on supporting his business ventures instead. Now, apparently, those expensive hobbies had evolved into a career significant enough to attract the attention of James Sterling, a man known for his discerning taste in art and his extensive philanthropic work in cultural preservation. Amanda said, her attention already drifting back to her phone. "Well, whatever. I'm going to take a bath with those new CBD bath bombs I got sent for review. This whole night has been like so much to process. I need to center myself and plan my content strategy for tomorrow." As Amanda disappeared into the master bathroom, with its marble surfaces and gold fixtures, Derek found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time since the proposal. He walked to his home office and, without fully understanding why, opened his laptop and typed James Sterling into the search bar. Articles flooded his screen in seconds. Tech Titan's latest acquisition, valued at $3.7 billion. Sterling Foundation announces landmark $50 million art initiative. The billionaire bachelor no more. James Sterling's engagement breaks internet. That last headline, published just 2 hours after the proposal Derek had witnessed, featured a series of photos that must have been taken by other restaurant guests. James and Sarah leaving Le Bernardin hand in hand, both glowing with happiness that seemed to radiate from the images themselves. Sarah's engagement ring caught the camera flash like a small constellation. The article described James as notoriously private about his personal life, and Sarah as renowned art restoration specialist Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who will spearhead the Sterling Foundation's groundbreaking cultural preservation program. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Derek stared at the title, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. Sarah had finished her doctorate, the PhD program she had been accepted to during their marriage. The program Derek had convinced her to abandon because it would interfere with his business expansion plans. "We can't afford for you to be a student right now," Derek had told her during one of their fights about her academic ambitions. "I need your support, not your divided attention. Besides, you're brilliant. You don't need some fancy degree to prove it." Of course, Derek's objections had never really been about money. His real estate business was already profitable enough to support Sarah's graduate studies. His real fear had been that if Sarah became Dr. Mitchell, she might realize she didn't need to be Mrs. Walsh, that she might discover her own worth and potential beyond what Derek was willing to acknowledge. Derek scrolled through more articles, each one revealing another layer of Sarah's post-divorce success and happiness. She had consulted on major museum exhibitions at the Met, the Guggenheim, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. She had published papers on Renaissance restoration techniques that were being cited by scholars worldwide. She had built a career that was both meaningful and respected. Everything she had dreamed of during their marriage but never had the opportunity to pursue. And now she was marrying a man who clearly valued her intelligence, her passion, and her authentic self. Everything Derek had taken for granted and ultimately thrown away in his pursuit of what he thought was a more advantageous life. The bathroom door opened, and Amanda emerged in a silk robe, her face covered in an expensive skincare mask that promised to reverse aging and maximize glow. "Are you seriously working right now?" she asked, noticing Derek hunched over his laptop. "After the incredible night we just had? I thought we could watch that new reality show everyone's talking about and maybe plan our weekend in the Hamptons." Derek looked at Amanda, really looked at her, and saw a beautiful young woman who had never challenged him intellectually, never inspired him to be better than he was, never made him question his priorities or values. She was perfect for his image but completely wrong for his soul, assuming he still had one. "In a minute," Derek said, turning back to his screen. But even after Amanda fell asleep beside him in their king-size bed, with its Egyptian cotton sheets and custom headboard, Derek lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. He thought about Sarah's genuine laughter, her obvious happiness, the way James had looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. Derek had never looked at Sarah that way. During their marriage, he had seen her as an extension of himself, a supporting character in the story of his success rather than the brilliant, accomplished woman she actually was. Now James Sterling, a man who could have anyone, had chosen Sarah. Not for her appearance or her social connections or her ability to enhance his image, but for her mind, her passion, and her authentic self. For the first time since their divorce, Derek wondered if the problem with his marriage hadn't been Sarah's lack of ambition, but his own inability to recognize the incredible woman he had been lucky enough to have by his side. The realization was devastating and long overdue. Derek told himself that hiring a private investigator was simply due diligence. Marcus Chen came highly recommended by Derek's attorney, a discreet professional who specialized in background checks for high-net-worth individuals navigating complex personal and business relationships. Their meeting took place in an unremarkable coffee shop in Midtown, the kind of place where two men could have a quiet conversation without attracting attention. "I need to understand the timeline," Derek explained, his voice carefully neutral as he slid a manila envelope across the small table. "How my ex-wife came to be involved with James Sterling. Just basic background information." Marcus nodded without judgment. At 55, he had seen enough wealthy men grappling with their ex-wives' new relationships to recognize the pattern, though he was too professional to comment on it directly. Standard relationship background check, Marcus confirmed, accepting the envelope containing Sarah's basic information and a substantial cash retainer. How detailed do you want this to be? Derek had been asking himself the same question for 3 sleepless nights. Comprehensive. I want to know how they met, how long they've been seeing each other, what their relationship looks like. And I want to know everything about Sterling's background, business practices, personal history, anything that might be relevant. 3 days later, Marcus returned with a thick folder that contained more information than Derek had expected. They met again at the same coffee shop, Marcus's expression professionally neutral as he laid out his findings. The subject relocated from her previous Tribeca apartment to a renovated brownstone in Park Slope approximately 6 months ago, Marcus began, consulting his notes with practiced efficiency. She maintained her studio workspace in Brooklyn, but significantly expanded operations, currently employing 2 full-time assistants and a research coordinator. Her income has increased by approximately 300% since the divorce. Derek felt an unexpected stab of something that might have been pride mixed with regret. During their marriage, Sarah's art restoration work had been relegated to a small corner of their Tribeca apartment, treated as a hobby rather than a serious career. Now she had built something substantial and successful entirely on her own. The Sterling connection began approximately 10 months ago, Marcus continued, sliding a series of photographs across the table. Initial contact was through the Metropolitan Museum's advisory board. Sterling was seeking an expert to head his foundation's new cultural preservation initiative. Dr. Mitchell was recommended by the museum's chief curator based on her work restoring the Bellini series. 10 months. Derek studied the photographs, professional shots of Sarah at museum events, academic conferences, and gallery openings. In every image, she looked confident and engaged, surrounded by colleagues and peers who clearly respected her expertise. Personal relationship began approximately 8 months ago, Marcus added. First documented public appearance together was at a charity gala for underprivileged arts education. They've since been photographed together at various cultural events, always in context related to their professional collaboration. Derek examined a photograph of Sarah and James at what appeared to be a gallery opening. They stood close together, examining a Renaissance painting with the kind of intellectual intimacy Derek had never shared with anyone. James was listening intently as Sarah pointed out details in the artwork, his expression one of genuine fascination rather than polite interest. Anything questionable about Sterling's background? Derek asked, hating himself for the question even as he spoke it. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. Define questionable. I don't know, Derek said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with his own line of inquiry. Financial irregularities, personal scandals, reasons someone might want to be cautious about trusting him. Marcus consulted another folder, this one significantly thicker. Sterling's reputation is remarkably clean for a man of his wealth and influence. He's been investigated by the SEC on 2 separate occasions, both times cleared completely with commendations for his cooperation and transparency. His business practices are considered aggressive but ethical. His only serious romantic relationship of note was with environmental lawyer Catherine Wells, which ended amicably 3 years ago when their career paths took them to different continents. Derek felt disappointment and grudging respect in equal measure. He had been hoping for something, anything, that would justify his growing obsession with his ex-wife's new relationship. However, Marcus continued, and Derek's attention sharpened, there is one incident in Sterling's past that some might consider controversial. Derek leaned forward despite himself. 10 years ago, Sterling was involved in the acquisition of Meridian Technologies through what could be characterized as a hostile takeover. The company's founder, Robert Hayes, lost everything and committed suicide approximately 6 months after the bankruptcy. Hayes' widow has been publicly critical of Sterling's role in her husband's death. Derek's pulse quickened. Tell me more about this widow. Victoria Hayes currently works in real estate development. Marcus paused, consulting his notes. She's listed as a senior partner at Walsh Development Group. The pieces clicked into place with startling clarity. Victoria Hayes, Derek's brilliant and ruthless business partner, the woman who had helped him build his real estate empire over the past 5 years, had personal reasons to hate James Sterling. She had never mentioned her previous marriage or her connection to Sterling, but Derek understood why. Victoria didn't discuss her personal history with anyone. Is there any substance to her claims about Sterling's involvement in her husband's death? Derek asked. Difficult to determine definitively, Marcus replied. Meridian Technologies was struggling financially before Sterling's involvement, but his acquisition tactics were undeniably aggressive. Hayes had leveraged everything on a new data storage technology that ultimately failed to find market acceptance. Sterling acquired the patents for a fraction of their projected value after the bankruptcy proceedings. Derek closed the folder, his mind racing with possibilities. Finally, he had something. Not proof of wrongdoing necessarily, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. Enough to make Sarah question whether she really knew the man she was planning to marry. I want you to dig deeper into the Meridian situation, Derek instructed, pulling out his checkbook. Find former employees, business associates, anyone who might have insight into what really happened. And I want to know everything about the technology Hayes was developing, why it failed, whether Sterling had anything to do with that failure. Marcus accepted the additional retainer without comment, though Derek caught a flicker of something in his expression that might have been concern. Mr. Walsh, Marcus said carefully, in my experience, investigations into the new relationships of former spouses rarely lead to the outcomes clients hope for. Sometimes it's better to focus on moving forward rather than looking backward. But Derek was already too invested in his course of action to heed such wisdom. As he drove back to his penthouse through Manhattan traffic, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in months. He wasn't trying to destroy Sarah's happiness, he told himself. He was trying to protect her from potentially making a devastating mistake with a man who might not be everything he appeared to be. Deep down, Derek knew he was lying to himself. But self-deception was easier than admitting the truth, that watching Sarah thrive without him had shattered something fundamental about how he understood himself and his own worth. The lie was more comfortable than the truth, so Derek clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man. Victoria Hayes had built her reputation on being unflappable, but Derek had never seen her quite like this. When he mentioned James Sterling's name during their weekly business review meeting, her usual composure cracked just enough to reveal the molten anger beneath. "Where did you hear that name?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping to the deadly quiet tone that had intimidated opposing counsel and business rivals for decades. Derek studied his business partner across the conference table in their downtown office. At 45, Victoria was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon that matched her no-nonsense approach to everything in her life. In 5 years of working together, Derek had never seen her display anything approaching vulnerability. "James Sterling just got engaged to my ex-wife," Derek said carefully, watching Victoria's reaction. Victoria's pen snapped in half in her hand. "Son of a bitch," she breathed, staring down at the broken pieces of plastic and ink staining her fingers. "I should have known he'd eventually find another brilliant woman to destroy." Derek felt a surge of vindication mixed with genuine curiosity. "Tell me about Robert Hayes." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, using the time to clean the ink from her hands with methodical precision. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of grief and rage that had been compressed and refined over a decade of simmering resentment. "Robert was a visionary," Victoria began, her eyes focused on some distant point beyond the conference room windows. "Meridian Technologies wasn't just another startup. We were developing quantum-enhanced data storage systems that could have revolutionized everything from medical research to climate modeling. The potential applications were limitless." Derek leaned forward, recognizing the passion in Victoria's voice that she usually reserved for particularly complex real estate deals. "Robert had invested everything we had, our savings, our house, his parents' retirement fund, into developing the technology," Victoria continued. "We were 6 months away from a major breakthrough when Sterling appeared." "What happened?" Victoria's smile was sharp and bitter. "Sterling happened. He didn't want to buy Meridian. He wanted to destroy it. He systematically undermined our funding, poached our key researchers with offers they couldn't refuse, and then spread rumors about the viability of our technology. When our primary investor pulled out, Sterling was there with an offer to buy our patents for pennies on the dollar." Derek found himself leaning forward despite himself. "That sounds like standard aggressive business practice, not necessarily Robert started receiving anonymous emails, Victoria interrupted, her voice cutting through Derek's rationalization like a blade. Technical critiques of his work that contained information only someone with access to our internal research could have known. Detailed explanations of why his approach would never work, written by someone who clearly understood the technology intimately. You think Sterling was behind the emails? I know he was, Victoria said with absolute certainty. One of Robert's former researchers, a man named Dr. Chen, who Sterling had hired away from us, finally admitted it 3 years after Robert's death. Sterling had been feeding him questions to ask, problems to raise, doubts to plant. Derek felt a chill run down his spine. That's psychological warfare. That's James Sterling, Victoria replied. He doesn't just compete with people, he destroys them, methodically, precisely, and with enough plausible deniability that he never faces consequences. Victoria stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass as she stared down at the Manhattan street below. Robert became obsessed with proving his critics wrong, she continued. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped talking to anyone except to defend his work. He was so focused on vindication that he couldn't see what was happening to him, to us, to everything we had built together. Derek thought about his own recent behavior, the sleepless nights, the obsessive internet searches, the growing isolation from everyone in his life except Amanda, who barely counted as real human connection. The technology Robert was developing actually worked, Victoria said quietly. Sterling implemented a version of it in his own systems 2 years after Robert's death, made billions from Robert's innovations while Robert's children grew up without their father. Derek felt his throat tighten. Victoria, I'm sorry, I had no idea. Victoria turned back to face him, and Derek was startled to see tears in her eyes, the first sign of genuine emotion he had witnessed from her in 5 years of partnership. Your ex-wife, Victoria said. Tell me about her. Derek found himself describing Sarah in ways he hadn't thought about in months. Her intelligence, her passion for art and history, her ability to see beauty and meaning in things others overlooked. As he spoke, he realized he was describing someone who sounded remarkably similar to how Victoria had described her late husband. She sounds like a brilliant woman, Victoria said when Derek finished. The kind of person who sees the best in others, who believes in the fundamental goodness of people. The kind of person James Sterling specializes in destroying. Derek's phone buzzed with a text notification from Amanda. At Pilates class, feeling so centered and amazing. Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. The contrast between Amanda's shallow cheerfulness and the gravity of his conversation with Victoria was jarring and depressing. What do you want to do about this? Derek asked. Victoria's smile was sharp and calculating. I want to save your ex-wife from making the biggest mistake of her life. And if we destroy James Sterling's reputation in the process, well, sometimes justice and personal satisfaction align perfectly. Derek felt a surge of excitement and purpose that he hadn't experienced since before his divorce. Finally, he had found someone who understood the stakes, who recognized the danger Sarah was walking into unknowingly. What did you have in mind? Derek asked. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed Derek a calendar entry. Sterling Foundation Gala, Metropolitan Museum of Art, 3 weeks. Sarah's work will be the centerpiece of Sterling's foundation launch, Victoria explained. Every major art publication will be there, plus business media covering Sterling's philanthropic expansion. It's going to be the biggest night of your ex-wife's career. Derek nodded, following Victoria's logic. And, Victoria continued, her smile growing more predatory, it would be such a shame if some uncomfortable questions about the foundation's funding sources happened to surface that night. Questions about whether James Sterling's billions are built on the graves of the brilliant people he's destroyed. Derek felt a moment of doubt, a small voice in the back of his mind suggesting that maybe he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. But the voice was overwhelmed by his need to do something, anything, to prevent Sarah from making what he was convinced would be a devastating mistake. What do you need from me? Derek asked. Victoria's smile was answer enough. Derek's plan crystallized over the following 3 weeks with the precision of a military operation. He and Victoria worked separately, but in coordination, Victoria handling the research and documentation, while Derek managed the media strategy and timing. The Sterling Foundation Gala was everything Derek had expected and more. The Metropolitan Museum's Great Hall had been transformed into a showcase for cultural preservation, with Sarah's restoration work displayed like crown jewels under museum-quality lighting. The guest list read like a who's who of New York's cultural and business elite. Museum directors, art critics, philanthropists, and business journalists all gathered to celebrate the launch of what was being billed as the most ambitious cultural preservation initiative in modern history. Derek arrived alone. Amanda was in Los Angeles attending an influencer conference, documenting her networking and brand partnerships for her increasingly successful social media empire. Their relationship had devolved into a series of text exchanges and Instagram likes, which suited Derek perfectly as his attention had become completely consumed by his investigation into James Sterling. From his position near the museum's information desk, Derek watched Sarah work the room with natural grace and expertise. She had clearly found her element, discussing restoration techniques with museum curators, explaining the historical significance of various pieces to interested donors, and guiding groups through the exhibition with the kind of passion that made complex technical processes accessible and fascinating. James Sterling remained close but never overshadowed Sarah's moment. Derek grudgingly admired the way Sterling asked intelligent questions and listened to Sarah's answers with genuine interest rather than polite attention. Their professional partnership clearly enhanced their personal relationship in ways Derek had never understood during his own marriage. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Package delivered to Robertson, Chen, and Williams. 30 minutes until publication. Derek felt his stomach clench with anticipation and anxiety. Victoria had spent 3 weeks compiling the most damaging information about the Meridian Technologies acquisition, packaging it into a narrative that raised serious questions about James Sterling's business ethics, and suggesting that his current philanthropic work might be an attempt to rehabilitate a reputation built on morally questionable practices. The materials had been delivered anonymously to 3 prominent business journalists and 2 influential art world bloggers. The timing was calculated for maximum impact. The stories would go live just as the gala reached its peak attendance, when the maximum number of influential people would see the coverage. Derek moved through the crowd, positioning himself where he could observe Sarah and James when the news broke. He told himself he was doing this to protect Sarah from making a terrible mistake, but deep down he knew his motivations were darker and more selfish than he wanted to admit. At exactly 9:15 p.m., Derek noticed the first signs that something had changed. Several guests had pulled out their phones, their expressions shifting from social engagement to concerned focus. Whispered conversations began spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Derek watched as a prominent art critic approached Sarah and James, his expression grave as he showed them something on his phone screen. Derek was too far away to hear the conversation, but he could see Sarah's face pale as she read whatever was displayed. The next 20 minutes unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. More guests checked their phones, more whispered conversations spread through the room, and Derek could see the evening's celebratory atmosphere beginning to shift toward uncertainty and discomfort. Then James Sterling did something Derek hadn't anticipated. Instead of making excuses or trying to control the narrative, Sterling asked for the microphone from the evening's host. The room gradually quieted as one of the most powerful men in the world prepared to address what was clearly a crisis. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his voice calm and clear despite the circumstances, "I'm sure many of you have seen the articles that have just been published about my past business practices, particularly regarding Meridian Technologies and the tragic death of Robert Hayes." Derek felt his throat tighten. This wasn't how he had expected Sterling to respond. "I could have addressed these allegations privately, through lawyers and public relations professionals," Sterling continued, "but I believe this community deserves to hear the truth directly from me, particularly because these accusations strike at the heart of why Sarah and I created this foundation." Sarah stepped closer to James, her body language protective rather than defensive. Derek realized with growing horror that his plan was backfiring spectacularly. "Robert Hayes was a brilliant man working on revolutionary technology," Sterling said, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "Meridian Technologies failed not because of anything I did, but because of a combination of market forces, funding challenges, and Robert's own increasingly risky decisions as he became desperate to save his company. Sterling paused, making eye contact with various people throughout the room. But Robert's death is something I carry with me every day, Sterling continued. Not because I caused it, but because I could have done more to help. I could have approached the acquisition differently. I could have found ways to preserve the company and support Robert through his crisis. Derek watched in growing dismay as the room's attention remained focused on Sterling, with obvious sympathy rather than suspicion. That's why this foundation exists, Sterling said, gesturing to Sarah and the surrounding exhibition. Robert Hayes died believing his life's work was worthless, but Sarah has shown us that beautiful, meaningful things can be restored and preserved even after they've been damaged or forgotten. Every piece in this exhibition represents something that was once broken but is now renewed. Sarah stepped forward to take the microphone, and Derek felt his heart sink as he recognized the strength and clarity in her expression. The articles published tonight contain information that could only have come from someone with access to confidential business records, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the museum's acoustics. Someone who wanted to destroy this evening and damage the Foundation's work. I have my suspicions about who that might be. Eerie, Derek felt the blood drain from his face as Sarah's eyes swept the room and seemed to land directly on him. But, Sarah continued, I won't let someone else's bitterness diminish what we've accomplished here tonight. This foundation isn't about James's past or my past or anyone else's past. It's about building something meaningful for the future. The room erupted in applause. Donors who had seemed uncertain minutes earlier were now approaching Sarah and James with renewed enthusiasm. The attempted scandal had somehow transformed into a moment of transparency and strength that made the foundation seem more trustworthy rather than less. Derek stood frozen in the crowd, watching his carefully orchestrated plan not just fail, but actively backfire. He had wanted to expose James Sterling as unworthy of Sarah, but instead he had created a situation that demonstrated Sterling's character and integrity under pressure. Worse, Derek realized that Sarah knew exactly who was behind the leaked information. Her suspicions about his involvement meant that any remaining possibility of reconciliation or even civil post-divorce relationship was now permanently destroyed. Derek had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and everyone in the room could see exactly who he really was. Derek woke up the next morning to find himself trending on social media for all the wrong reasons. His phone had been buzzing incessantly since 6 a.m. with calls from reporters, business associates, and acquaintances wanting to know if the Derek Walsh mentioned in various blog posts and social media threads was the same Derek Walsh they knew. The answer, unfortunately, was yes. Bitter ex-husband sabotages art gala, read the headline on page 6, accompanied by a photo Derek didn't remember being taken. Him standing alone at the edge of the museum crowd, his expression dark and focused as he watched Sarah and James address the crisis he had created. The article included quotes from several unnamed sources who described Derek as obsessed with his ex-wife's new relationship and unable to accept that she had moved on. Worse, someone had apparently done enough research to connect Derek to Victoria Hayes and the Meridian Technologies connection, painting a picture of a calculated conspiracy to destroy James Sterling's reputation. Derek's business phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. His remaining clients were asking uncomfortable questions about his mental state and professional judgment. His business partners were demanding emergency meetings to discuss damage control and strategic positioning. But the absolute worst part was Amanda's response, delivered via Instagram story at 7 a.m. Pacific time from her hotel room in Beverly Hills. OMG, you guys, Amanda said directly to her phone camera, her makeup perfect despite the early hour. I literally can't even begin to process what I'm reading about Derek right now. Like, I always knew he was weird about his ex-wife, but this is next-level toxic behavior. Thank God I'm strong enough to recognize red flags and remove myself from unhealthy situations. The video, which Amanda had hashtagged with her sure toxic masculinity, Nush red flags, your self-care, know your worth, had been viewed over 2 million times and shared by dozens of influencers and lifestyle bloggers. Derek had become a cautionary tale about emotional immaturity and unhealthy relationship patterns, dissected by people who had never met him but felt qualified to diagnose his psychological problems. Derek was reading through the social media coverage on his laptop when his building's doorman called to announce a visitor. Mr. Walsh, there's a gentleman here from Hoffman, Walsh and Associates, who says he needs to deliver some legal documents. Should I send him up? Derek's blood turned to ice. Hoffman, Walsh and Associates was one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, the kind of place that handled high-profile divorces, celebrity scandals, and corporate crisis management. Their involvement meant that Sarah and James were taking legal action against him. The legal messenger was professionally polite, but clearly uncomfortable as he handed Derek a thick manila envelope marked "Urgent, Legal Documents Enclosed." Derek's hands shook slightly as he opened the envelope and began reading the restraining order petition. The document was thorough and damning, citing a pattern of stalking, harassment, and intimidation that had escalated to include coordinated attempts to damage the petitioner's professional reputations and personal safety. The petition included evidence Derek hadn't realized existed. Surveillance footage from the museum showing Derek's arrival and positioning during the gala. Records of his payments to Marcus Chen for investigative services. Detailed timelines correlating Derek's activities with the leaked information about Meridian Technologies. Most devastating of all were the personal details Sarah had included about their marriage and divorce. Derek read with growing horror about incidents he had forgotten or rationalized away. His attempts to control Sarah's friendships, his dismissal of her career ambitions, his pattern of emotional manipulation whenever Sarah showed signs of independence. The respondent has demonstrated an inability to accept the end of our marriage and has escalated his intrusive behavior to include professional sabotage and public humiliation. Sarah's statement read, "I am genuinely concerned for my safety and that of my fiancé, as Mr. Walsh's behavior has become increasingly erratic and threatening." The restraining order, if granted, would require Derek to stay at least 500 feet away from Sarah, James, their workplaces, and their residence. Violation would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Derek's phone rang, and he answered without checking the caller ID. "Derek, it's Margaret Chen," said the voice of his attorney. "We need to talk immediately. Are you at home?" Margaret arrived within an hour, her expression grim as she reviewed the restraining order petition and the evidence Sarah's legal team had compiled. "This is bad, Derek," Margaret said without preamble. "Very bad. They have documented evidence of obsessive behavior, harassment, and what could be classified as business interference. The district attorney's office is already reviewing this for potential criminal charges." Derek felt like he was watching his life collapse in real time. What kind of criminal charges? Stalking, harassment, possibly cybercrime charges if they can prove you were involved in unauthorized access to confidential business records, Margaret replied, consulting her notes. New York takes these kinds of cases very seriously, especially when they involve high-profile victims. Derek's phone buzzed with another text notification. This one was from Victoria. "Saw the news. We need to meet immediately. This is worse than we anticipated." Derek showed the text to Margaret, who frowned deeply. "Derek, I need to ask you directly. How involved was Victoria Hayes in your investigation of James Sterling? Because if this becomes a criminal matter, conspiracy charges could be involved." Derek realized with sinking horror that his obsession with Sarah and James had potentially destroyed not just his own life, but Victoria's as well. Victoria, who had trusted him with her painful history and her desire for justice, was now at risk of criminal prosecution because Derek couldn't accept that his ex-wife had found happiness without him. "Margaret," Derek said quietly, "I think I need help. Real help. Not just legal representation, but I think something is wrong with me." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Derek, that's the smartest thing you've said since I've known you. But first, we need to deal with the immediate legal crisis. Then we can talk about getting you the kind of help you need." Derek nodded, understanding that his carefully constructed life was about to become very different, very quickly. He had spent months trying to prove that James Sterling wasn't good enough for Sarah, and instead had proven definitively that he himself had never been worthy of her at all. The irony was devastating, but at least it was finally honest. The next 3 weeks unfolded like a controlled demolition of Derek's entire existence. His business partners at Walsh Development voted him out during an emergency board meeting, citing conduct detrimental to the company's reputation and fiduciary interests. His largest clients began terminating contracts, unwilling to be associated with what the media had dubbed the stalker ex-husband scandal. Derek found himself sitting in his penthouse at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, still in his pajamas, surrounded by takeout containers and empty whiskey bottles, scrolling through social media coverage of his professional and personal destruction. The financial impact was substantial. Without his business income, Derek couldn't maintain his Manhattan lifestyle. The penthouse mortgage alone cost more per month than most people earned in a year, and his other expenses, the country club membership, the luxury car payments, the designer wardrobe, had been calibrated for a seven-figure annual income that no longer existed. But the social exile was somehow worse than the financial losses. Manhattan's elite circles had closed ranks against Derek with surprising speed and efficiency. Invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls went unreturned. Even his doorman had begun treating him with the kind of professional courtesy reserved for residents who were behind on their maintenance fees. Derek's phone buzzed with another news alert. Sterling Foundation announces record-breaking donations following gala controversy. The article described how the attempted scandal had actually increased public support for the foundation's work, with donors rallying to support what they saw as an important cultural preservation initiative being attacked by petty jealousy. Sarah and James had handled the crisis with such grace and transparency that they had emerged stronger than before. Their engagement had become a fairy tale romance in the public consciousness. Brilliant art expert and philanthropic billionaire united in their mission to preserve beauty and culture for future generations. Derek's doorbell rang, surprising him. He hadn't been expecting anyone, and most of his remaining social contacts had stopped visiting weeks ago. Through the peephole, Derek saw Victoria Hayes standing in his hallway, her usually perfect composure showing cracks around the edges. "We need to talk," Victoria said without preamble as Derek opened the door. Victoria looked around Derek's disaster zone of an apartment with obvious distaste, but her expression was more concerned than judgmental. "Derek, you look terrible," she said bluntly. "When was the last time you showered or ate a real meal?" Derek couldn't remember. The days had blurred together into a haze of obsessive internet searching, bitter self-recrimination, and increasing isolation from anything resembling normal human interaction. "The legal situation is getting worse," Victoria continued, settling into one of Derek's designer chairs despite the surrounding chaos. "My attorneys think the district attorney is preparing to file charges. Conspiracy, harassment, possibly cybercrime if they can prove we accessed confidential business records." Derek felt his stomach drop. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get dragged into this." Victoria's laugh was bitter and self-aware. "Derek, I wasn't dragged into anything. I orchestrated half of this disaster because I've spent 10 years wanting revenge against James Sterling. But watching him handle our attack with such dignity and transparency, I think I've been wrong about everything." Derek looked up from his hands to meet Victoria's eyes. "I got a call from Dr. Chen yesterday," Victoria continued. "David Chen, the researcher who used to work for my husband and then went to work for Sterling. He wanted to apologize for something he told me 3 years ago." Derek waited, sensing that Victoria was about to say something that would change everything. "David lied to me about the anonymous emails," Victoria said quietly. "Sterling never asked him to sabotage Robert's work or plant doubts about the technology. David made that up because he felt guilty about leaving Meridian for better pay, and he thought telling me what I wanted to hear would somehow help." Derek felt the last piece of his justification crumble away. "Sterling acquired Meridian through aggressive but legal business practices," Victoria continued. "Robert's death was the result of his own mental health crisis, market pressures, and bad decisions. Sterling bears no more responsibility for Robert's suicide than any other competitor in the tech industry." Victoria stood and walked to Derek's windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline that had once made them both feel powerful and important. "I spent 10 years building a case against a man who didn't deserve my hatred," Victoria said, "and I dragged you into my delusion because it was easier than accepting that sometimes tragic things happen without anyone being to blame." Derek felt something break open in his chest, a dam of anger and resentment that had been holding back a flood of grief and regret. "Sarah looks happy," Derek said quietly. "Yes," Victoria agreed. "She does. And James Sterling treats her with the kind of respect and admiration you never showed her during your marriage. The words should have hurt, but instead Derek felt relief at hearing someone finally speak the truth he had been avoiding for months. I keep thinking there must be something I can do, Derek admitted. Some way to fix this, to make things right between us. What would right look like to you? Victoria asked. Derek was quiet for a long moment, really considering the question for the first time. I used to think it meant getting Sarah back, Derek said slowly, proving that Sterling wasn't good enough for her. But now, I don't know. Maybe right just means accepting that I destroyed the best thing in my life and learning to live with that knowledge. Victoria nodded. That's actually the first honest thing I've heard you say about this situation. Derek's phone rang, and he glanced at the screen to see Dr. Morrison's name, the psychiatrist who had visited him weeks earlier and whom Derek had been avoiding ever since. You should answer that, Victoria said gently. And Derek? I'm dissolving our business partnership. I'll buy out your remaining shares at fair market value. It's time for both of us to start over. As Victoria gathered her coat and headed for the door, she paused and looked back at Derek. Sarah deserves to be happy, Victoria said, and so do you. But happiness isn't something you can take from someone else or build by destroying other people's joy. You have to create it yourself, from the inside out. After Victoria left, Derek sat alone in his empty penthouse and finally answered Dr. Morrison's call. Dr. Morrison, Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm ready to talk now. The criminal charges were filed on a Thursday morning. Derek learned about them not from his attorney, but from a reporter who called him at 7 a.m. asking for comment on the stalking and harassment charges filed by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Derek hung up without responding and immediately called Margaret, who confirmed what he already knew. His life as he had understood it was officially over. The DA is offering a plea bargain, Margaret explained during their emergency meeting later that morning. 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory psychological counseling, and a permanent restraining order. If you reject the plea and this goes to trial, you're looking at potential jail time. Derek stared at the legal documents spread across Margaret's conference table, each page representing another layer of his personal and professional destruction. There's something else, Margaret continued, her voice gentler than usual. Someone leaked security footage from James Sterling's engagement party to several gossip blogs this morning. Derek's blood turned to ice. What kind of footage? Margaret pulled out her tablet and showed Derek a grainy video that made his stomach lurch with recognition and horror. The footage clearly showed Derek sitting in his car across the street from the party venue, watching the celebration through telephoto lenses for what the timestamp indicated was over 4 hours. This was taken 3 days after the restraining order was served, Margaret explained. Technically, you weren't violating the 500-foot requirement, but the optics are devastating. The media is calling it evidence of continued stalking behavior. Derek stared at the video in complete horror. He barely remembered that night. He had been drinking heavily and apparently driven to the party location on some kind of unconscious autopilot, drawn by a compulsion he didn't fully understand to witness Sarah's happiness one more time. The police have already seen this footage, Margaret continued. They're treating it as evidence of ongoing harassment, despite the legal warnings you'd received. The plea bargain offer might be withdrawn if more evidence surfaces. Derek's phone buzzed with notifications he no longer bothered checking. His social media mentions had become a constant stream of criticism, psychological analysis, and warnings to women about recognizing red flag behavior in relationships. Amanda had transformed her experience dating Derek into a multi-part Instagram series about surviving toxic relationships that had gained her hundreds of thousands of new followers and several brand sponsorship deals. She had been interviewed by 3 different lifestyle blogs about recognizing narcissistic patterns and was reportedly writing a book about her experience. Derek, Margaret said quietly, I think you should accept the plea bargain, and I think you should seriously consider checking yourself into an inpatient treatment program. Derek looked up from the legal documents. You think I'm that far gone? I think you're struggling with obsessive behavior that has escalated to the point where you're a danger to yourself and others, Margaret replied honestly. The Derek Walsh I represented during your divorce 18 months ago was self-absorbed and emotionally immature. But he wasn't this person. Something has broken down, and you need professional help to fix it. That afternoon, Derek accepted the plea bargain and signed papers that would formally end his ability to contact or approach Sarah for the rest of his life. The restraining order was permanent and non-negotiable. Derek's phone rang as he was leaving the courthouse. The caller ID showed his building's concierge. "Mr. Walsh, I'm calling to inform you that your lease termination has been processed," the voice said with professional courtesy that barely masked relief. "The building management has decided not to renew your residential agreement due to the negative publicity affecting other residents." Derek realized he was being evicted from his own building. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," the concierge continued. "Building security will escort you during any moving activities to ensure compliance with building policies." Derek hung up and stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the Manhattan streets that had once made him feel powerful and connected to something larger than himself. Now the city looked indifferent and hostile, full of people who had already moved on with their lives while Derek remained frozen in a moment of poor judgment that had destroyed everything he had built. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the news about the charges. Hope you get the help you need. V. Victoria," offering something like compassion even after Derek had dragged her into his personal disaster. Another text arrived immediately after. "Sarah's wedding is next weekend. Thought you should know so you can avoid social media if needed. Take care of yourself." Derek realized that Sarah and James were moving forward with their lives, their wedding, their foundation, their shared future built on mutual respect and genuine love. Meanwhile, Derek was standing on courthouse steps facing criminal charges, eviction, and the complete collapse of everything he had thought defined his worth as a person. But for the first time in months, Derek felt something other than anger or obsession. He felt tired, bone deep, soul-weary tired, and maybe, just maybe, ready to stop fighting a battle he had lost before it even began. Derek walked down the courthouse steps toward an uncertain future, finally understanding that rock bottom wasn't a place you fell to. It was a place you chose to stop digging. The Manhattan Psychiatric Hospital's Crisis Intervention Center didn't look like what Derek had expected. Instead of the sterile, institutional environment he had imagined, the building resembled a modern office complex with warm lighting, comfortable furniture, and art on the walls that actually seemed chosen for beauty rather than just filling space. Dr. Sarah Chen, a name that made Derek wince every time he heard it, was younger than Derek had anticipated, with a direct manner that cut through his attempts at deflection and rationalization like a surgical instrument. "Mr. Walsh, you're here because you've been court-ordered to undergo psychological evaluation and treatment as part of your plea agreement," Dr. Chen said during their first session, her voice professionally neutral but not unkind. "But I'm not interested in the legal requirements. I'm interested in understanding what led you to this point." Derek sat in the comfortable chair across from Dr. Chen's desk, acutely aware that this was probably the most important conversation of his life. Everything else, his business, his relationships, his sense of identity, had already been destroyed. This was his last chance to salvage something meaningful from the wreckage. "I loved her," Derek said, the words sounding hollow and inadequate even to himself. "Tell me about that love," Dr. Chen replied, her pen poised over a legal pad. "What did it look like during your marriage? How did you express it?" Derek began to describe his relationship with Sarah, but as he spoke, he began to hear his own words differently. He talked about how he had encouraged Sarah to give up her graduate program to support his business expansion, how he had helped her understand that her art restoration work was more of a hobby than a serious career path, how he had guided their social life to focus on connections that would benefit his professional advancement. "You mentioned that during your marriage, Sarah gave up her doctoral program," Dr. Chen interrupted. "Can you walk me through how that decision was made?" Derek remembered that conversation from 5 years earlier with painful clarity. Sarah had been accepted into a prestigious art history PhD program at Columbia, but the timing conflicted with Derek's plans to expand into commercial real estate development. "I told her we couldn't afford for her to be a student when I needed her support for the business expansion," Derek said slowly, hearing his own words as if for the first time. "But that wasn't really true, was it? I could have afforded her tuition. I just didn't want her to do it." "Why didn't you want her to pursue her doctorate?" Derek was quiet for a long moment, grappling with a truth he had never been willing to acknowledge. Because if she became Dr. Sarah Mitchell, she might realize she didn't need to be Mrs. Derek Walsh. Derek admitted, the words feeling like physical pain as he spoke them. It was the first completely honest thing Derek had said about his marriage, possibly ever. Dr. Chen made notes without comment, allowing Derek to sit with the weight of his admission. You described your behavior as love, Dr. Chen continued, but what you're describing sounds more like control. Can you help me understand the difference between the two? From your perspective, Derek tried to explain, but every justification he offered sounded increasingly hollow. He had convinced himself that managing Sarah's choices was protecting her, that limiting her opportunities was helping her focus, that his vision of their future was what was best for both of them. Did you ever ask Sarah what she wanted? Dr. Chen asked simply. The question hit Derek like a physical blow. He realized with horrifying clarity that he had never really asked Sarah what she wanted from life, from their marriage, from her career, from anything. He had simply assumed that what he wanted was what she should want too. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chen guided Derek through the painful process of examining his behavior patterns and psychological motivations. He learned about narcissistic personality traits, about how his childhood experiences with an emotionally distant father and an overwhelmed mother had created a desperate need for control and external validation. You use Sarah as a mirror, Dr. Chen explained during one particularly difficult session. Her role in your life wasn't to be a full human being with her own dreams and ambitions. Her role was to reflect back your success, your importance, your worth as a person. When she started developing her own identity and interests that didn't center around you, you felt threatened. Derek was also required to attend group therapy sessions with other men who had been court-ordered for domestic violence, stalking, or harassment charges. Listening to their stories was like looking into a funhouse mirror. He saw distorted but recognizable versions of his own justifications and denials. I never hit her, said Mike, a construction worker whose ex-girlfriend had finally gotten a restraining order after months of increasingly aggressive surveillance. I just needed to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. That's not abuse. That's caring about someone's safety. I was protecting her from making bad decisions, insisted Robert, an accountant who had tracked his ex-wife's every movement through hidden GPS devices and social media monitoring. She had terrible judgment about people. Someone needed to look out for her interests. Derek heard his own twisted logic in their explanations, his own self-serving rationalizations in their claims of good intentions. The realization was nauseating and absolutely necessary. The common thread in all of these stories, the group therapist observed, is the belief that you knew better than these women what was good for them, that your judgment was more important than their autonomy. Can anyone help me understand where that belief comes from? Derek found himself speaking before he had fully formed the thought. Because if they could make their own decisions and be happy without us, then what did that say about our value as men? Derek said quietly. If Sarah could be successful and fulfilled without my guidance and support, then maybe I wasn't as important or necessary as I needed to believe. The group was quiet for a moment, and Derek realized he had articulated something that resonated with everyone in the room. 3 months into treatment, Derek received surprising news from Margaret. Victoria Hayes had contacted his attorney about a financial settlement that would allow Derek to maintain a modest lifestyle while he rebuilt his life and continued treatment. She's also established an anonymous scholarship fund for men seeking mental health treatment after domestic violence or stalking charges, Margaret informed Derek. She thought you might want to continue therapy beyond your court-mandated period. Derek was quiet for a moment, processing Victoria's unexpected generosity. She's taking care of me even after I destroyed her career and reputation, Derek said. Victoria went through her own reckoning this year, Margaret replied. Sometimes crisis forces people to confront truths they've been avoiding. She realized that her desire for revenge against James Sterling had been as destructive and obsessive as your behavior towards Sarah. That evening, Derek wrote his first letter to Sarah since the restraining order was issued. Not a letter he intended to send, that would violate the legal agreement and risk additional criminal charges, but a letter for himself, part of Dr. Chen's therapeutic process. Dear Sarah, Derek wrote, his hand cramping from the unfamiliar act of writing by hand, rather than typing. I'm sorry. Not sorry that you're happy. You deserve every moment of joy and success you found. I'm sorry that it took your happiness to show me how miserable I had made you during our marriage. Sorry that I spent 5 years trying to turn you into someone I could control instead of loving the amazing person you actually were. Derek wrote for hours, filling pages with apologies and admissions he had never been able to voice. He wrote about his regret for dismissing her career ambitions, for isolating her from friends who challenged his authority, for making her feel small and insignificant whenever she showed signs of independence. When he finished writing, Derek felt empty but clean, like a wound that had finally been drained of infection. He wouldn't send the letter. That would be another violation of Sarah's boundaries and autonomy. But writing it was a beginning, a first step toward taking responsibility for the pain he had caused without expecting forgiveness or redemption in return. Derek stood in the small community center kitchen in Queens, ladling soup into paper bowls for the homeless men who attended the weekly dinner program. The work wasn't glamorous or prestigious, but it connected him to something he had never experienced during his real estate career: the satisfaction of helping people without expecting anything in return. Derek, we need more bread on table 3, called Maria Santos, the program coordinator who had become something like a friend over the past 8 months. Derek had completed his court-mandated community service hours 5 months ago, but he had kept volunteering at the shelter, the food bank, and the literacy program for formerly incarcerated men. The work filled a void in his life that he hadn't realized existed: the need to contribute to something larger than his own advancement and ego. His apartment now was a modest one-bedroom in Astoria, furnished with pieces from thrift stores and the Salvation Army. He had kept only a few items from his penthouse days: a watch his father had given him for college graduation, some photographs from his childhood, and the letter he had written to Sarah but would never send. Dr. Chen had helped Derek understand that healing wasn't about winning Sarah back or even earning her forgiveness. It was about becoming someone worthy of forgiveness, whether he ever received it or not. You can't love someone until you stop trying to own them, Dr. Chen had said during one of their sessions. And you can't be loved authentically until you stop trying to earn it through performance and control. Derek was learning both lessons slowly, sometimes painfully, but genuinely. On this particular evening, as Derek cleaned up after the dinner service, Maria handed him a copy of the New York Times that someone had left behind. "Thought you might want to see this," she said gently, her voice full of the compassion that had made her such an effective advocate for the men they served. The headline read, "Sterling Mitchell Wedding Captured Hearts and Headlines. Tech Billionaire and Art Expert Wed in Intimate Ceremony." Below was a photograph of Sarah and James leaving a small church in the Hamptons, surrounded by close friends and family members. Sarah wore a simple but elegant ivory dress that emphasized her natural beauty, rather than making a statement about wealth or status. James looked at her with obvious adoration and respect. Derek studied the photograph for a long moment, waiting for the familiar stab of jealousy and regret that had characterized his emotional response to Sarah for so long. Instead, he felt something unexpected and healing: genuine happiness for both of them. "She looks beautiful," Derek said quietly, meaning it completely. "You doing okay with this?" Maria asked, her voice full of concern, born from months of watching Derek work through his recovery process. Derek nodded, surprising himself by meaning it. "Yeah, I think I am." The article mentioned that the wedding had been deliberately small and private, with the couple requesting donations to arts education programs instead of traditional gifts. James had surprised Sarah by commissioning a mobile art restoration laboratory that would travel to underserved communities, bringing museum-quality conservation services to places that couldn't afford professional restoration. It was exactly the kind of meaningful, thoughtful gesture that Derek had never understood during their marriage. Sarah had always cared more about the impact and significance of her work than the prestige or financial rewards. James clearly understood and supported that part of her personality in ways Derek never had. Derek folded the newspaper and handed it back to Maria. "I'm going to head home. Same time next week?" "Always," Maria smiled. "You've become one of our most reliable volunteers. The guys really look forward to seeing you." On the subway ride back to Astoria, Derek reflected on the past year of his life. He had lost everything he had thought defined his value as a person: wealth, status, social connections. the woman he thought he loved. But in the process of losing those external markers of success, he had discovered things he hadn't known he was missing. Genuine human connection, purposeful work that helped others, and a slowly growing sense of peace with himself and his place in the world. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "How are you feeling about transitioning to monthly sessions instead of weekly? You've made remarkable progress." Derek typed back, "I'd like to keep going with weekly sessions for now. I'm still learning who I want to be." The therapy had taught Derek that healing wasn't a destination, but an ongoing process of becoming more honest with himself and more genuinely connected to other people. He was beginning to understand the difference between love and possession, between caring for someone and controlling them. As the train pulled into his station, Derek caught his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him was different from the one who had sat in that expensive restaurant almost 2 years ago, watching his ex-wife get engaged to another man while planning his own path toward destruction. This man looked tired but genuine, humble but hopeful. He had work that mattered, relationships based on mutual respect rather than transaction, and a growing understanding of what it meant to contribute to the world rather than just taking from it. Derek still thought about Sarah sometimes, but now his thoughts were wishes for her continued happiness, rather than schemes to reclaim what he had never really deserved in the first place. He had learned that loving someone meant wanting them to flourish, even if that flourishing took them far away from you. It wasn't the ending Derek had once wanted, but it was the ending he needed. And for the first time in his adult life, that felt like enough. Derek walked through the quiet streets of Astoria toward his small apartment, his simple life, and the difficult but necessary work of becoming a better man. He would probably never see Sarah again, would never have the chance to apologize in person for the pain he had caused. But maybe that was appropriate. Maybe the best gift he could give her was his absence, his commitment to becoming someone who would never again confuse love with control or mistake possession for devotion. The city lights blurred past as Derek headed home, finally understanding that happiness wasn't something you could take from someone else or build by destroying other people's joy. You had to create it yourself, from the inside out, one choice at a time. If Derek's journey from entitled narcissist to genuine human being resonated with you, smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm understand that these deeper psychological stories matter to you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever witnessed someone struggle with letting go of a relationship? Or maybe you've seen the difference between toxic love and genuine love in your own life. I read every single comment and love hearing your perspectives. And if you're craving more stories that dive deep into the psychology of human behavior, the messy, complicated, real stuff that makes us who we are, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because next week, I'm bringing you another story that will make you question everything you think you know about love, success, and what it really means to win in life. Remember, the best stories aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors that help us understand ourselves and the people around us a little bit better. Until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep listening.